My purpose here, of course, is to introduce this young man, Premier Brian Tobin, to you. He is a young man and has already accomplished more than most of us even aspire to in a very short time. Just to refresh your memories, he's been an elected political figure for the past 18 years. Member of Parliament, Parliamentary Secretary, Chair of the National Liberal Caucus, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and currently the 6th Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is only to date. We're fortunate to have this accomplished young man address us. What can be more stimulating to a group of positive thinkers than to hear the words of a man who exudes the power of positive thinking? We Newfoundlanders tend to be rather negative now and then. Nobody in this room, of course. But our Premier, fix that. But our Premier always manages to put a positive spin on what is happening around us. Please help me to welcome, in a fitting manner, this young, vibrant, positive thinker, the Honourable Brian Tobin, Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you very much, Pat, for your very warm and kind introduction, and thank all of you for a warm reception this morning. Let me say that I clearly, in sitting here for just a few minutes, have already gotten far more out of this meeting, being here this morning, than I could ever possibly contribute, and I'm really tempted to move a motion that I sit down, we bring Bill back to the microphone and carry on. Although I was getting very worried that Bill was going to say, I am. I was saying, I am. And I was keeping a sharp ear just in case he said APC. Now, Bill, I think you're 99% perfect. And if I can see you after the meeting, we'll work on the other 1%. It's a real delight to be here. I can honestly say to you that in the few minutes that I've been in the room, this was not, I don't have a text, I have a few notes scratched, so it wasn't in the text, there isn't one, and certainly wasn't in the few notes that I scratched. But I can honestly say to you that there is, in even a few minutes sitting in this room, a real positive energy, an uplifting feeling, spirit in this room. And I wish that the people of our province, generally, and I know many people in our province are so positive, but some who find themselves consumed by the size of our problems, rather than seized by the size of our potential, could be here and could feel what a positive outlook does in beginning the day, and of course coming to grips with any kind of opportunity or any kind of problem. I thought that what I would do this morning in this room, and I must tell you, I was expecting 25 or 30 people. I thought we'd have a round table, but you've got a larger organization than I realized, is give you a little bit of a report card, if I can, about where I think in the context of government Newfoundland and Labrador is. And I recognize that when you think about our province, government is merely one dimension. There are many more dimensions that affect and shape and direct where our province is going on a variety of planes. But let me speak to the one that I have some involvement with, and that is government. And let me begin by just, if I can, reflecting for a minute or two, and I'm inspired to do so by Glenn's words when he said, we need to step outside our comfort zone and take on new challenges and seize new opportunities. And as he was saying it, I was reflecting that just a few years ago, I was on the way to the province in the month of December with my family. We were going to Bill, and I share your affirmation of the wonderful Canada Winter Games that are unfolding in Corner Brook. I was on the way to Marble Mountain for a little bit of a family ski break, and while we were there, I got a phone call from Clyde Wells, and Clyde and I stayed in touch on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a week. We had to by virtue of the jobs that we each had to talk about the province, and Clyde told me that he would be stepping down as Premier of the province. And it's the kind of decision that when you make it quickly and clearly and solidly. You don't dilly or dally or talk about it, and once you've made it, you know that your situation profoundly changes. So obviously Clyde hadn't been calling around telling people he was thinking about leaving. He was keeping that to himself, as he should have, and when he decided to go, of course his decision was made, and he shared it with a number of people first, and then within a few days with the public. So Clyde called me, and in telling me that, because he had 2 years left in his mandate, he instantly put before me the question. I had to ask myself, what did I want to do next? Was I interested in taking on this mandate that Clyde had fulfilled for all the years that he had, and attempting to do a job there? And at the time, I was a member of Parliament and had been for 16 years, a member of the Cabinet, a variety of experiences in the House of Commons, in opposition and in government. And I had achieved, just a few years earlier, and anybody who tells you any different in politics isn't telling you the truth, achieved one of my dreams. Remember, it was a very important day, a very exciting day for me and my family after 16 years of politics, serving through the ranks, and being in opposition for most of those years, to finally be called upon at Rideau Hall with some of my colleagues, with Prime Minister Chrétien, to serve in the Cabinet. That felt, I'll tell you honestly, it felt pretty good. And it was something that was a dream for me. So here I am 2 years later, and Clyde is stepping aside, and I have a question to answer. Do I want to take up this role? Do I want to offer myself for this role? Do I want to say to the party that I'd like to serve? And I have to tell you, at that stage, we'd lived in Ottawa, Jodine and I, and we've always considered ourselves a team, for 16 years. Our children, all 3 of them, Heather, who's now 18, and Adam and Jack, who are 16 and 12 respectively, were born in Ottawa. They grew up in Ottawa. They went to school in Ottawa. They were in constant and regular contact with Newfoundland and Labrador by virtue of family and other kind of holidays and visits and trips. But let's face it, these children knew Ottawa as their home. My daughter, who's now at university, had started preschool and was then in grade 10 with her friends. And we were on a ski holiday, as I said, and we reflected, and we went back to Ottawa at the end of that holiday, and I made a decision. I should say we made a decision, the whole family, that we wanted to take up this new challenge. I wanted to at least offer myself as a candidate and see where it took us. And I can tell you, it was a very heart-wrenching moment when my daughter, who's a sweetheart, said to me, "Dad, I thought I was going to graduate with my friends." It was the toughest thing and the biggest price, or the biggest symbol of the price that families pay for the political careers of those who pursue them at that moment. Now, I tell you this story for a reason. I tell you for this reason. 2.5 years later, and I speak not of political life now, but of family life, and of community, and of place. 2.5 years later, living in Newfoundland and Labrador, living in this community, St. John's, that's where my job is, I want to share with you the powerful feeling of being connected and of being back in the community. Easy for me and Jodine, but new for our children, that my children now feel. Last winter we went back to Ottawa in December. We took them out to the old neighborhood, the 2 boys, and drove around. They saw the old house, saw the old school, visited some of their friends, had a very interesting day. And at the end of the day, we were back in the hotel and they said, "Mom and Dad, let's go home." That's the power of living in this community. That's what's unique about Newfoundland and Labrador. We're getting up on a Saturday and going to the store to pick up the items that are missing from the grocery shelf, become an experience and a contact with a neighbor and a friend. You're not just a customer, you're a member of the community. We're going to school, and the friendships that are made at school are part of the broader community, and the roots run very deep. We're family, and neighbors reach out and support each other. And I can tell you that on a personal basis, when Bill Galton talked about Newfoundland and Labrador being that close to heaven, he's absolutely right. And the best part of the decision that we've made as a family to seek this job, and the best part of this job, I want to assure you the best part of this job, is living again in the broad community of Newfoundland and Labrador and being with family and being with friends. Well, let me come to the job. It's been an interesting 2.5 years and a challenging 2.5 years. And I want to tell you what the most challenging part of the job for me has been. And I've been in politics for a long time, so nothing new about the political side. The most challenging part of the job in our province has been to deal and to learn to ride the waves and the turbulent waters stirred up by those whose focus is primarily in this province on the negative. This was really, I have to tell you, a bit of a surprise for me. Having spent 16 years in Parliament, traveled back and forth 2 or 3 times a month to the province, the biggest surprise for me in living full-time in the community and assuming the chair of Premier, and that's why this meeting this morning is so refreshing, were the number of voices out there in our community. 2.5 years ago was my sense in 1996 of people who mostly sit on the sidelines, whose hands are inactive, whose minds aren't focused, whose capacity isn't being tapped, whose potential isn't being fulfilled, telling us about the size of our problem, the size of our challenge, and why we're doomed for failure, and why we'll never get ahead, and why we can't change our circumstance, and how it's somebody else's fault that we haven't achieved our potential, and why some power larger than ourselves will keep us from ever fulfilling our potential. I used to hear it in the morning talk shows. I'd read it in the letters to the editor. I'd run into it on the street. And I found that jolting. I found it jarring. I found it a little surprising. But you know, I should easily be a happy member of this club. As a positive thinker, I didn't let it personally dissuade me from my fundamental belief that our capacity in this province to change our circumstance, to make a difference, to build, retaining all of the wonderful parts of our character and culture and sense of community, to build a new Newfoundland and Labrador, is possible. And when I come here this morning, that faith is very much reaffirmed. So let me talk a little bit about our province. We've gone through a tremendous period in this province of transition. Cast your minds back just a few years to 1992 and the collapse of the fishery. Hundreds of communities and tens of thousands of people being severed from a way of life that has sustained this place for hundreds of years. Indeed, the very reason, the fishery, for the province being settled in the first place. Think to the kind of social upheaval that has caused and still is being played out today in our community. Realize that over the last 10 years, up until this year, Newfoundland and Labrador has had negative GDP growth in each of those years since the collapse of the fishery in 1992. But we're beginning, because I think of the good work and the good planning put in place by my predecessor and by his predecessor, by members of both parties, governments of both parties, we're beginning to see the capacity to change positively and to build a better, more solid foundation for our province. And I don't say our problems are all over, and I don't say that nirvana has arrived, but I do say that we're moving in a positive direction. We're moving towards growth, we're moving toward confidence, and we're moving toward the beginnings of a new economy. What are the areas in which that's happening? Newfoundland and Labrador is in the process now of moving from 0%, if you want, of Canada's light crude production to a total of about 25% of the nation's light crude production over the next 2 or 3 years. Hibernia is up and running. I talked with Harvey Smith yesterday. It's going to produce, before the year is out, 135,000 barrels of crude per day. It's not publicly known, but the rate of pressure and rate of production is such that it'll probably exceed 150,000 barrels a day. There are currently 4 wells producing on that platform. That huge, massive, technological monolith, quite an achievement, 300 kilometers offshore, and each of the 4 wells are the 4 highest producing wells in this country. There are 42 trillion cubic feet of natural gas associated with the Jeanne d'Arc Basin, associated with the offshore areas. That's the estimate of the National Energy Board. There are 8 trillion cubic feet currently already discovered, where the demarcation has occurred. And to put that in perspective, the Sable Island development is based on a 3 trillion cubic feet reserve. There's exploration underway this winter. 2 rigs, unprecedented since the beginning of exploration in this province. For the first time, there's a land sale which occurred this fall, which has blocks of land being bidded and taken up not just in the Jeanne d'Arc Basin, the highly prospective zone where the oil and gas now in place has been found, but beyond the Jeanne d'Arc Basin. Indeed, this past fall, the highest bids which were taken up in zones beyond the Jeanne d'Arc Basin, suggesting a second area for major development and discovery. This winter there will be drilling by Pan-Canadian in western Newfoundland. Indeed, David Tour, the president of Pan-Canadian, has suggested that he believes, because they're back now for the 3rd year in a row, that the western Newfoundland oil and gas play is like a giant riddle. They've found the hydrocarbons. They haven't found it in commercial quantities yet sufficient to justify a major development, but he says he's confident. That's why they keep coming back. That when the riddle is solved, they'll have a development potentially the size, on land perhaps, or near land, of what is occurring with Terra Nova, with Hibernia. And of course the Terra Nova development ramps up this year with up to 1,000 employees at Bull Arm. First steel has been cut. Hebron is subject to 3D seismic. Hebron, that field, is estimated to be as large as Hibernia. Riverhead is coming. White Rose is coming. There's a well cap, a formation in that development alone of 2 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. And work is ongoing both by NOIA, our Newfoundland Offshore Industry Association, by HMDC, Hibernia Management Development Corporation, and by government, to understand the obstacles that have to be surpassed to tap the natural gas potential of the offshore. So here's an area where I say to you, most of us, and I include myself in this, haven't really understood that we are seeing the emerging tip of the iceberg. But what is yet to come, what is yet to be discovered, what is yet to be tapped for our benefit, in a constructive way, in a careful way, one that respects the environment, one that doesn't hurry the job and risk the environment, is truly huge indeed. We move from oil and gas and talk about our manufacturing sector, because this speaks to the ingenuity of Newfoundlanders. Here's a sector that has grown at 15, 18% a year over the last 4 or 5 years. It's grown not just in St. John's and not just in the Donovan's Industrial Park, but it's grown beyond the capital city and into rural Newfoundland and Labrador. How proud I was last January to be part of Team Canada with the Prime Minister and the other premiers, and to be in Santiago, Chile, And there in Santiago, I was called up to witness the signing of a contract, and the announcer said, "I want to call forward the Premier of Newfoundland, and I want to call forward the representative of Cottles Island Lumber from the city of Cottles Island." And we signed a contract as part of an $80 million housing development, $30 million which is being sourced out of Cottles Island. And you will see in the next 5 or 6 weeks that the first houses from Cottles Island are being shipped to Chile. Because the folks in Cottles Island said, "We're making prefabbed homes and summer homes and log homes," and I'm sure some of you have seen the product, "and we'd like to go to Chile with you, Premier, and sell them some houses." And I said, "Well, okay." And darned if he didn't. Because nobody told that company in Cottles Island that the script was already written for Newfoundland and Labrador, and the script said, "We can't succeed." He didn't read the script. He wasn't playing his part. And lots of Newfoundlanders these days aren't playing their part and not reading the script. The IT sector grew by 30% last year. Newfoundland and Labrador just hosted Soft World 98 here in St. John's, the biggest industry gathering by this sector every year, and we've just held the biggest gathering ever in the history of this industry in this province. And dynamic new players from Newfoundland and Labrador were there. Companies like Zedcom, formed a handful of years ago by a couple of young graduates at a Memorial University who decided that since it was a knowledge-based, information-based sector, and since we in Newfoundland and Labrador are on the end of a telephone line and fiber optics and coaxial cable, that we are as capable to reach the marketplace as anybody else, and began their company. Zedcom. They're over in the Battery Hotel. They've got what used to be one of the meeting areas in the back of the hotel, and they got executive offices looking down over the Narrows. Who are Zedcom? Well, they're a company that's providing the software that manages the operating system at Johns Hopkins University in the United States. There were young companies whose technology was on one of the recent Challenger missions this May. It's part of a Challenger Space Lab experiment. They were a young company operating in Newfoundland, in the United States, across this country, and in Europe. They're a bright young company who are constrained only by the size of their own imagination and the power of their own ambition and the degree of their own energy that they're prepared to commit to the exercise. NDI was there. Well, who were NDI? NDI is a little company, not so little anymore, right across from the Newfoundland Hotel. Have you seen that old house right across from the hotel with NDI? What is NDI? Nautical Data International. Who are NDI? What do they do? They're a company that digitalized the ocean floor, ocean mapping. They've got an exclusive contract with the Canadian Hydrographic Service of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And they digitalize maps and they sell their product all over the world. Who are their employees? Former fishermen, former fish plant workers working in IT, and one of the most successful companies of its kind, indeed one of the leading companies of its kind anywhere in the world. That's happening in Newfoundland and Labrador. And recently we've seen some other examples of confidence and competence, world-class competence in IT. Newtel, our telephone company, which a number of years ago expanded out into information technology solutions and other IT sector services, buying up oil and gas related companies, buying up Stratus Global, which is the largest marine communications company in the world, effective this week, because it in turn bought another US-based companies. And they've recently announced a partnership with other telephone companies out of Atlantic Canada. And effectively, I think you're going to see Newtel, a Newfoundland and Labrador-based company, becoming the dominant telephone company and IT sector services company for all of Atlantic Canada, one of the biggest IT sector companies in this country. And it's happening here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Again, because we've thrown away the script that says that we are a small, off-the-beaten-path market for somebody else's services or technology. And we've begun to think of ourselves instead as people that provide the goods, provide the services, provide the know-how, that can produce it in quality and capacity, that can compete and win anywhere around the world. Our tourism sector is beginning to move forward. In 1997, during the Cabot celebration year, we had a 22% increase. Bill, you must have been spreading the word while you were traveling across the country. We had a 22% increase in non-resident visitors from outside the province to Newfoundland and Labrador. That was the largest increase of any province of Canada in 1997. It was the biggest one-year production we've ever had. And the great fear in the industry was, now that we'd had one tremendous year, could we do it in 98? Would we do it in 99? Would it be a one-time great show? 1998, the numbers are now in. They haven't been made public yet, but we exceeded last year's numbers in 1998. The increase was maintained, and the level of activity in the sector continued quite strong. And of course, 99 is the 50th anniversary year, beginning with the Canada Winter Games in Corner Brook. In 2000, Newfoundland and Labrador will lead the continent in celebrating the new year. And believe me, the party will begin right here. Another sector where people of their own volition, their own imagination, with their own energy, are changing the face of this sector. Education reform. It's been controversial, it's been difficult, but it's moving forward in Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, there are some challenges for our province too. Maintaining our healthcare system. This is a large challenge, and it's one that government is doing its best, and I'm afraid our best is never based on my expectations or yours as much as we would like. We're going to maintain our healthcare system. It is a trade-off we cannot make. It is one of the things, the Canada healthcare system, that I think defines us as a country. And I would digress for a second and say to you that Canada, we're nearly 50 years members of Canada, members of this partners, part of the family. Canada is, for good reason, the country that the United Nations for the last 5 years in a row has described as, in terms of quality of life measurements, indices, as they like to say. Canada is the best country in the world in which to live, and we're privileged to be part of this country. But what makes this country unique and special is a degree of tolerance and compassion and reaching out and sharing that is unique amongst Western-based free enterprise democracies. You don't have the degree of reaching out and sharing in the United States or in Germany. Actually, Germany has quite a strong social policy infrastructure, but in other Western countries that you have in Canada. But in Canada, that unique quality or character of Canada is today being stretched to the limits. We've gone down the road. I'm a free enterpriser. I believe in celebrating success in the private sector. I think it's a waste of time and energy to envy success. I think we should celebrate it, and where we can, we should emulate it. But I think we've gone down the road just perhaps a touch too far in the pursuit of so-called global free enterprise rules, and in the process we may be leaving behind in this country some of the values that has made this country unique. And one of those is Medicare. The federal government had to cut its deficit, had to get its fiscal house in order. But enough's enough. And I've been telling some of my old friends we've got to put some money back into the Medicare system. And I'm hopeful that Paul Martin, who I think has done a tremendous job for us as our Minister of Finance, will do that in February, come the next budget. Well, I've gone on a little longer perhaps than I should have at a breakfast meeting where you haven't had a chance to eat. So let me And I think they were being very prudent here. They were saying if he speaks before we eat, there's no danger we'll have any stomach upset later, depending on what he says. Let me conclude by saying I think we've taken this big ship of state. If we can picture ourselves sitting in the ship, in the dining hall, picture ourselves as the population of Newfoundland and Labrador, through some rough seas. Collectively, our province has seen some very big challenges. In the late 1980s and 90s have really caused us to question from time to time whether or not we take this ship, all of us collectively as a crew, out of rough waters and safe back to port. I think we know now that we can take the biggest challenges that fate can conspire to throw our way, and we can handle them. We know we can grow stronger because of them. We know we can restructure the way we organize our society. We know we can grow new wealth in a variety of sectors. We know we have potential which is yet unfulfilled, and we know there will be a few more rough passages along the way, but we know we're going to arrive safe, sound, with our ship, our home intact, with our passengers safe, and we know we can be a model for the rest of Canada, and by extension, a model for the world. So I just wanted to come by this morning and to say to you that what you do here, but more importantly what you do in your workplace, in your families, and in the community, focusing on the positive, focusing on our potential, not being consumed by our problems, that ultimately is what's going to change Newfoundland and Labrador. And I ask you for your partnership in seeking the kind of change that we need, and indeed that we deserve, if we pull hard and work hard together. Thank you very much.